Darius the Great, the mighty ruler of the Persian Empire, was one of history's most ambitious conquerors. But when he first came to power, he was just a relatively obscure member of the royal family with a very tenuous claim to the throne. So how did Darius go from nobody to becoming arguably the most powerful man in the ancient world? Well, partly through sheer force of will, but there was also a bit of good fortune involved as well. You see, the Achaemenid Empire, the so-called First Persian Empire, had been racked by instability following the mysterious death of its great king Cambyses II. Before his untimely demise, Cambyses had conquered Egypt and had even marched into Central Asia. But during his absence, his throne was usurped by a crafty impostor, who was really just a Magian priest by the name of Gaumata. Now, pretending to be Cambyses, who had supposedly been murdered by their father, Darius the Great, Gaumata seized the throne and fooled most of the empire into thinking that he was the rightful heir. However, there was one person who saw through the deception, a guy named Darius, who was a distant cousin of Cambyses. You see, Darius was a bigwig in the empire, holding an important military and administrative position in the 10,000 Immortals, the elite Persian guard. So when Gaumata seized the throne, Darius knew right away that this was a fraud, and so he joined forces with some other Persian nobles and military leaders to overthrow the impostor. Together, they infiltrated Gaumata's palace and assassinated him, and then Darius proclaimed himself king of Persia. Unfortunately for Darius, though, that didn't really make him any friends, because now every satrap in the empire, the rulers of its various provinces, saw this as an opportunity to declare independence. Satraps in Egypt, Babylon, Media, and elsewhere proclaimed their autonomy, and many of them even put their own candidates on the throne. So Darius spent the next few years putting down rebellions, and it was a real handful. At one point, he was fighting in at least 4 different theaters of war, but Darius proved equal to the task. He crushed the revolts in Egypt and Babylon with overwhelming force, even as he was simultaneously fighting other wars, and little by little, he brought the empire back under the control of the central government. Indeed, once he had pacified the empire, Darius went on to conquer new territories, expanding Persian control into parts of India to the east and Thrace and Macedonia to the west. In the process, he really consolidated one of the largest empires in all of ancient history. But Darius didn't just conquer new lands. He also built a new foundation for his empire. He introduced a uniform system of weights, measures, and coinage, and he built the Royal Road, a series of roads that stretched from Sardis to Susa, allowing for easier communication and troop movement across the empire. And so, through a combination of military might, political cunning, and administrative reform, Darius the Great went from being a relatively minor royal to the most powerful man in the ancient world. When Darius I rose to power as king of the Persian Empire around 522 BCE, his first challenge was to unite and stabilize a vast, diverse Rome that stretched across 3 continents. Having crushed rebellions and secured his rule, Darius looked ahead to a grand vision, a city that would stand as the heart of his empire, a place of ceremony, governance, and splendor. This city was to be around 518 BCE. The planning for Persepolis began. Darius wanted it to be more than just a capital. It was to be a monumental symbol of Persian power and the glory of his reign. The site was chosen carefully, perched on a low terrace in the Zagros, offering a commanding view over the plains below. But building Persepolis was no small task. It required an enormous workforce, not just Persian laborers, but skilled artisans and craftsmen brought in from all corners of the empire. Egyptians known for their stone carving, Mesopotamians expert in architecture, and craftsmen from Anatolia and other lands all came to contribute. These workers were united by the shared goal of creating something unprecedented. Thousands of workers labored for years, cutting massive stone blocks, carving intricate reliefs that told stories of the empire's peoples and their offerings to the king, and erecting grand columns topped with sculpted bulls and lions. The palaces, halls, and treasury buildings grew slowly but steadily, each stone carefully placed as part of a vast, intricate plan. The city was not just a seat of power, but a place for festivals and ceremonies that brought together nobles, satraps, and dignitaries from throughout the empire. Persepolis embodied the diversity and unity of the Persian world. Its reliefs famously depict representatives of the many nations under Persian rule bearing tribute, all converging on the king. Building Persepolis took decades and an estimated tens of thousands of people, from laborers and architects to artists and administrators. It was a grand project that reflected Darius's ambition, not only to rule but to be remembered forever. Though Darius would not live to see its final completion, Persepolis stood as a lasting legacy of his reign, a testament to the empire's power, wealth, and cultural richness that echoed through the ages. The ancient city of Persepolis, one of the greatest architectural achievements of the Achaemenid Empire, was built primarily under Darius I and continued by his successors, notably Xerxes I and Artaxerxes. However, the individual craftsmen who actually built Persepolis were not named in most surviving records, which is typical for ancient monumental construction projects. Who were the craftsmen? While we don't know most of their names, we do know who they were and how they worked. Thanks to a remarkable set of documents called the Persepolis fortification tablets and Persepolis treasury tablets, written in Elamite, Babylonian, and Aramaic. The builders included skilled artisans, stonemasons, metal workers, woodworkers, and laborers from across the vast Achaemenid Empire, including Persians, Medes, Elamites, Babylonians, Egyptians, possibly even Greeks and Indians. Brought from distant parts of the empire, they worked in highly organized labor teams, sometimes with recorded rations and wages, suggesting a relatively professional, non-enslaved workforce for much of the construction. Known individuals, some administrative tablets record individual names, though mostly officials or supervisors such as Pariaka, a known official in the treasury tablets, Ertastuna, possibly an overseer of workers, but again, these are rare and usually not the names of the actual stone carvers or architectural legacy. The incredible reliefs, columns, and palatial structures at Persepolis reflect multi-ethnic craftsmanship, blending styles and techniques from different parts of the empire, which was likely intentional to symbolize Achaemenid unity and power. The Hall of 100 Columns was one of the most grandiose structures in the ceremonial capital of the Achaemenid Empire. Construction began under Xerxes I around 470 BCE and was completed under his successor. Persepolis itself was not a city in the traditional sense, but a ceremonial complex used primarily for royal rituals, receiving dignitaries, and celebrating major festivals like the Persian New Year. The Hall of 100 Columns was likely used to host imperial receptions, display the power and wealth of the empire, and store royal treasures or tribute from cities. Imagine yourself transported back in time to the heart of the ancient Persian Empire. You find yourself in Persepolis, a ceremonial capital where kings are crowned and empires are celebrated. Before you stands the magnificent Hall of 100 Columns, a testament to the grandeur of the Achaemenid kings. But how exactly was such a magnificent structure built? Join us as we break down the step-by-step process of constructing the Hall of 100 Columns. Step 1. Laying the foundation. The entire Persepolis complex was constructed on a vast stone terrace, roughly 15 meters high, built into the mountainside above the Marv-Dasht plain. To support the massive weight of the columns and roof, the ground beneath the hall had to be carefully leveled and stabilized. Deep foundations had to be cut into the bedrock using sophisticated stone-cutting techniques, and the whole area had to be overlaid with stone paving. That would provide a solid base for the columns. Step 2. Erecting the columns. The hall consisted of 100 limestone columns arranged in a 10 by 10 grid, forming a nearly perfect square of approximately 70 meters by 70 meters. Each column was around 14 to 20 meters high and was made from local gray limestone, likely quarried from nearby mountains. Some columns were carved in a single piece, while others were made from 2 or more sections joined together. The capitals, or tops, of these columns were intricately sculpted in the shape of double-headed animals, such as bulls, lions, and griffins. These heads were not only symbolic, representing strength and royal authority, but also functional, designed to cradle horizontal cedar roof beams across their broad backs and between the twin heads. Step 3. Constructing the cedar roof. One of the most remarkable aspects of the hall was its roof, made of cedar wood beams, a rare and precious material in ancient Iran. The cedar likely came from the forests of Lebanon, particularly the mountains of the Levant. This required long-distance trade, facilitated by Persian control of the eastern Mediterranean and its Phoenician allies. Timber was floated down rivers or transported by sea across the Persian Gulf and overland via caravan routes. Massive cedar beams, sometimes over 15 meters long, were used to span the spaces between columns. These beams rested on the flat necks of the animal capitals, which projected outward from the column shafts. The roof likely had secondary wooden supports, including purlins and rafters, to carry the load across longer distances. Above the cedar beams, the roof was probably finished with reed mats, or thatching for insulation, and a mud plaster or clay layer, possibly mixed with bitumen or straw, to provide weather resistance. Some scholars suggest it may have been partially gilded or painted, though no trace had survived today. Step 4. Construction techniques. Builders used earthen ramps, rollers, pulleys, and wooden scaffolding to lift and erect the columns. Skilled laborers from across the empire, including Babylonians, Egyptians, Greeks, Lydians, and were brought in to work under royal architects. The construction of the Hall of 100 Columns serves as a testament to the incredible engineering feats and construction techniques employed by the ancient Persians. Through the use of sophisticated tools, skilled labor, and innovative techniques, they were able to construct one of the most magnificent structures of the ancient world. Step 5. Decoration and symbolism. Although most of the structure is now in ruins, archaeologists believe the hall was richly decorated. The walls and columns may have been painted or covered with decorative metal fittings. The flooring could have included carved stone panels or tiles. Reliefs on the doorways and entrances likely showed tribute bearers and royal guards, reflecting the imperial power structure. What made it possible? The success of the whole construction was due to centralized imperial control over vast resources, a skilled multicultural workforce drawn from every corner of the empire, trade networks stretching from Egypt to India, and a remarkably sophisticated understanding of architecture and materials for its time. Step 6. Destruction and legacy. In 330 BCE, Persepolis was famously burned by Alexander the Great, possibly as an act of revenge for the Persian invasion of Greece or as a drunken accident. The roof of the hall of 100 columns, made of flammable cedar, would have burned completely, collapsing the massive stone columns. Today, only the column bases and a few surviving shafts and capitals remain, but they are among the most impressive archaeological remnants of the Achaemenid Empire. The hall of 100 columns was a marvel of ancient engineering, built with local stone but roofed with imported cedar from Lebanon, supported by 100 colossal columns, intricately carved with symbolic animal capitals, roofed using advanced timber construction spanning long distances, built by a multicultural, highly skilled workforce under centralized imperial direction. This hall was not only a functional space but also a symbol of imperial power, divine kingship, and the architectural sophistication of one of the greatest empires of antiquity. This is Persepolis, the ceremonial capital of the Achaemenid Empire, built in the 6th century BCE on a high rocky plateau in present-day Iran. It's an incredible archaeological site, but there's a secret behind its creation that not many people know about. The reason they chose this spot for their capital was because it was naturally defensible and had amazing views. But there was a huge problem. This area is naturally arid and elevated, far from any large rivers or lakes, and the ancient Persians needed to figure out how to get enough water to build a city and sustain its residents and workers. So how did they solve this problem? Well, we're going to talk about that right after. To understand how the ancient Persians solved this problem, we need to talk about one of their greatest inventions, the Qanat. If you've never heard of a Qanat before, don't worry, I don't blame you. Basically, a Qanat is an underground channel or aqueduct used to supply water to places where it's scarce. When the Persians began construction of Persepolis, they noticed that the surrounding hills had springs and streams that flowed year-round and were full of fresh water. So what they did was they dug vertical shafts into the ground to reach underground water, then connected these with a gently sloping tunnel that ran for many kilometers underneath the dry land to the west, effectively creating an invisible pipeline that channeled water from wet to dry places. The reason they dug an underground tunnel instead of building a canal above ground was because the climate is hot and dry. Surface canals would have lost much water to evaporation or absorption into the dry soil, but underground tunnels protected the water and ensured a steady supply. It was a brilliant solution to a very real problem. Water brought into Persepolis via Achaemenids would have been used for drinking and daily life of the residents and workers, irrigation of gardens and greenery in the palace complex, ritual cleansing and ceremonial purposes, and even construction activities, like mixing mortars and cooling the stone. On top of the builders of Persepolis constructed large stone cisterns and reservoirs to collect and store water, especially during dry months or times of peak use. Some cisterns were underground to keep the water cool and reduce evaporation. Water was then distributed to different parts of Persepolis through a network of channels and pipes, made from stone or baked clay. To manage and utilize water efficiently, the architects of Persepolis also implemented other hydraulic techniques, like stone channels and aqueducts, to direct water flows precisely to gardens, pools, and fountains within the palace complex. They also used terracing to help control runoff and allowed the use of gravity to aid water distribution. Finally, the Persians made use of fountains and reflecting pools, which not only served a decorative purpose, but also functioned to cool the microclimate and circulate water within the city. While Persepolis sits on a plateau with no direct surface water, several natural springs existed in the nearby foothills. The Persians would use these springs as starting points for their king. Additionally, seasonal rivers or streams in the area could be tapped or diverted toward the Qanat system, especially during wetter months. So in summary, the water supply for Persepolis was a carefully engineered system that utilized Qanites to tap underground water sources at higher elevations and channel them to the city. It used cisterns and reservoirs to store and regulate the supply. It distributed water throughout the city using channels, pipes, and terraces, and it made use of natural springs and the surrounding topography to support the system. This complex water management system not only supported the daily needs of a large city in a harsh climate, but also enabled the flourishing of one of the ancient world's most magnificent architectural achievements, Persepolis. Persepolis was constructed mainly under the reign of Darius I, and was later expanded by his son Xerxes I and grandson Art. Its construction started around 518 BCE and took several decades to complete. When it was finally finished, Persepolis was one of the most magnificent cities of the ancient world, an extraordinary symbol of the Achaemenid Empire's wealth, power, and cultural diversity. Unlike other cities, Persepolis was not primarily built as a residential or commercial hub. Instead, it was designed to serve as a ceremonial capital, a place where the empire's vast territories were symbolically unified under the Persian king. The city hosted grand celebrations, most notably the Nowruz festival, the Persian New Year, which was celebrated with great pomp and ceremony. During these events, representatives and dignitaries from across the empire would travel to Persepolis to pay tribute to the king. This included delegations from diverse peoples: Babylon, Egyptians, Greeks, Indians, and many others who brought gifts, wealth, and exotic goods to demonstrate their loyalty. The reliefs carved on the walls of Persepolis depict these delegations in rich detail, emphasizing the empire's vast reach. Persepolis was an architectural masterpiece. The city was built on a massive terrace cut into a mountain slope, with grand staircases leading up to massive palaces, audience halls, and treasury buildings. The most famous building, the Apadana Palace, featured enormous columns and lavish decorations. The art and architecture of Persepolis reflected the multicultural nature of the empire. Influences from Persian, Median, Elamite, Mesopotamian, and Egyptian traditions blended into a unique style that symbolized the empire's diversity and unity. The reliefs and sculptures depicted royal ceremonies, religious scenes, and scenes of tribute, projecting the king's image as a powerful and divinely sanctioned ruler. This visual propaganda reinforced the idea of a centralized, orderly empire ruled by the great king. Though Persepolis was primarily ceremonial, it also served as an important treasury and storage center. The empire collected tribute and taxes from its often in the form of precious metals, livestock, and goods, which were stored in Persepolis's treasury buildings. However, administrative and duty governance activities were handled in other cities, such as Susa and Babylon. Persepolis was more symbolic than practical in this regard. New imperial order. Although Persepolis was magnificent and symbolized Persian imperial power, it was no longer the empire's main administrative center. That role had shifted to cities like Susa and Still, Persepolis represented the heart of Persian royalty and religious ceremonies. So when Alexander's army arrived in 330 BC, they found a mostly empty city, a ceremonial capital with no bureaucracy and few defenders. It is not entirely clear whether Alexander intentionally set fire to Persepolis as a deliberate political act, or whether it happened accidentally during a drunken celebration. But what is clear is that when the city burned, it was a symbolic ending to the Achaemenid dynasty's reign. Shortly after Persepolis fell, the last Persian king, Darius III, was betrayed by one of his satraps, provincial governors Bessus, who wanted the throne for himself. Darius was captured and killed by Bessus's men in 330 BC. When Alexander heard about this, he pursued Bessus, eventually capturing and executing him in 329 BCE for killing the rightful heir and for treason. With Darius dead, Alexander declared himself the legitimate successor to the Persian throne, taking the title King of Asia. This was a crucial shift from a Greek conqueror to a ruler aiming to unify the vast Persian Empire under his control. After Persepolis, Alexander began to transform his image and policies to integrate himself with the Persian ruling class, wearing Persian royal attire, adopting the regalia of Persian kings, introducing court rituals like proskinesis, a ritual bowing or prostration to the king, which was controversial among his Macedonian and Greek companions who saw it as a sign of subjugation. And he married Roxana, a Bactrian princess, later to other Persian noblewomen, cementing his political alliance with the eastern elites. These moves were part of a deliberate effort to stabilize his control over the empire by blending Greek and Persian cultures, a policy sometimes called the fusion of East and West. However, these changes caused unease among his Macedonian troops, who saw Alexander becoming too Persian. Some viewed it as a betrayal of their Greek heritage, creating tension within his army. Despite the discontent, Alexander continued his military campaigns, marching eastward to Bactria, modern Afghanistan, and regions known for their rugged terrain and fierce resistance. His forces fought many difficult battles and sieges. Eventually, he reached the Indus River Valley in modern-day Pakistan and India. His army pressed on to the Hyphasis River in 326 BCE, but exhausted and homesick, his troops refused to go further east, and so Alexander was forced to turn back. Unlike cities like Babylon or Susa, which remained important administrative centers, Persepolis was never rebuilt. The destruction was so extensive that the city ceased to be a political or cultural hub. Later Persian empires, such as the Parthians and Sasanians, leaving Persepolis as a ruined testament to the old empire's glory. Today Persepolis stands as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, a symbol of ancient Persian grandeur and the dramatic turning point marked by Alexander's conquest. If you're passionate about ancient history and want to explore the past in depth, don't forget to subscribe for more content like this.